Once again, welcome. We're so thankful that you're here at Morrison Hill or joining us online. We're even more thankful that we can welcome you into the presence of God himself, into his worldwide body as we continue to try to serve him. The Bible has these timeless truths in it. God has these moral boundaries that just stand the test of time. They apply to everything. But sometimes it feels so foreign. Sometimes the stories in the Bible seem so different than today. Over the next several weeks, we're going to explore some of God's moral boundaries with a lot of stories that come from the Bible, especially some that we don't normally tell a lot. And there's reasons we don't tell them. We're not trying to keep them a secret. There's just some stories that they're so fun and they're so positive and they're so encouraging. And then there's other ones where you're like, wow, is that really how that went down? If we could get the lights to stay on, that would be awesome. I'd love to see everybody's faces, and I don't want everybody to go to sleep. So, but anyhow, we're going to jump right in this morning and just walk through, but that's what you can expect over the next several weeks. A lot of stories and just some laser-focused things that we can apply to our lives the same way that the people in the Bible itself applied it or should have applied it. So here we go. First thing. How many have ever been down a road and actually hit a guardrail? Anybody? Okay, I'm raising my hand. I'm a little embarrassed, but it's a true story. Several years ago, when all of my adult sons were kids, I used to take the oldest three to Dillis Elementary School. Anybody remember Dillis Elementary School? Good school. We used to drive out there, and about halfway there's a 90-degree turn. And it's got the most dinged up, barely there guardrail you've ever seen, okay? Because I think a lot of people have hit it. I was one of them. And when I hit it, it was a rainy day, and I slowed way down, thank God, because I knew better, but somehow we hydroplaned, and we just smacked that thing just with the side of the car. And barely tapped it, but it scraped up the side of the car. We made it to school on time. I've thought about it a lot later. In fact, every single time I pass that curve to this day, I remember fondly my old bright yellow Dodge Neon. Anybody else remember that one? And I remember the boys. I love them even more today if that's possible, but I miss how they were when they were little sometimes. I remember a lot, but I'm also thankful for that guardrail because I think I would have ended up in a ditch. I certainly would have made it to school on time. Who knows? It could have been really, really bad. The point that I'd like us to think about as we talk about guardrails today and over the next several weeks is simply this. Guardrails are there to keep you on track. Guardrails are not all about how evil the woods are or something like that. They're about, no, stay on track. We're getting somewhere. God's trying to take us somewhere, and they protect us. They help us, even if sometimes we resent them. The truth is, when we first hear about God's boundaries, almost all human beings on the planet, when we first hear about it, they sound so completely foreign to us. It's like we're over here and God's over here. This is our boundaries. This is God's boundaries. Why would I ever jump out of this fence and jump into that one? And it just sounds impossible. We can't often even imagine a Venn diagram where they kind of merge a little bit and there's a little common ground. It's so different. And if that's how you feel this morning, you're not alone. That's where all of us start and all of us try to get away from. But those of us who have followed Jesus for a long time, who have submitted to him, who have learned, who have failed, who have succeeded, who have seen what happened, little by little we start to realize that God's moral boundaries actually correspond to genuine reality. Our moral boundaries they're just loose. They do whatever we want. They change with our emotions. They change with our desires. They change with our circumstances, whoever we're in some sort of a relationship with at the time. Whatever it is, our moral boundaries are very liquid and change all the time. That's individually, that's in groups, that's as a culture. God's are just, this is how it is, y'all. It's just how it is. And eventually we start picking that up and trying to do better. But here's something else foundational as we go through this one more time. And I know you've heard this, but we've got to remember how important this is and act accordingly. God gives us true freedom. And he doesn't have to, but he does. He relentlessly does. He would rather us have the freedom to make mistakes than just force us to do the right thing. He wants us to choose. He gives us those choices. So if you're following the study guide today, if you're writing down words, first 2 words to write down is true freedom. There are so many scriptures, by the way, on this Bible study that we just don't even have time to put up on the screen or talk about today. But I hope you go back and you look at every single one and study them later. But here's what God does. He gives us true freedom, and that also includes I don't know what it is, the privilege, the curse, I'm not sure, but the ability to experience the consequences of our actions. And then, on top of all of that, he also, because he is sovereign, he steps in. Sometimes he works through the mess. He actually uses the stuff that we did wrong somehow for good. Sometimes he just works completely around us or bypasses us altogether because we get so far off track. But his dream is that we stay within those guardrails and actually make that journey. We're tracking so far. Okay, we're getting to the story, I promise. There's going to be stories today. But a couple more just big ideas. The first is, our boundaries, what we tend to do when we first start even trying to follow God's, is we try to basically stick with his, but we expand on it a little bit. And we have this psychic dissonance going on where we go, okay, I believe that God is wise. I believe God is smart. I believe he's the creator. He knows best. He knows best in every situation. But for myself, in this particular situation, I think I know a little better than he does. And we may not say it out loud. We may not lay it all out just that clearly. But if you've ever sinned in your life, hello, human beings, we've all done it at some point, right? That's exactly what we're saying. I believe God knows what he's doing, but I believe I know better. Eventually, those of us who have somehow failed enough and succeeded enough and kept following him enough, we start seeing it, and we start, and if anything, we actually start building our boundaries within his. I'll tell you right now, that guardrail that I told you about on the way to Dillis Elementary, I slow down way crazy slow every time I go next to that one now. Way slower than I need to. Because I remember when I thought I was going slow enough, I still smacked it. And I don't want to smack it again. I thank God I was okay, but it was expensive and annoying to have to get my car fixed up. And it's an embarrassing story to still have in the book of my story. So I slow way down. I make some boundaries for myself that I don't impose on everybody else, but I keep myself within it. And eventually that's how we start to treat God's boundaries. We start to see the kindness in them. Well, there's this guy named Abram and his wife named Sarai. And we hear a lot about them. We hear a lot of stories, and they're usually held up as these really wonderful people. And I'm not saying they weren't wonderful, and I'm not saying that God did not use them. In fact, their story in Genesis 12 starts really, really well. God calls Abram to come and leave where he lives and go somewhere where he'll show him. He didn't even tell him where. And he goes, okay. That's some pretty powerful faith. And he gets his wife and everybody. Actually, I'll just read that part straight out. It says, so Abram departed as the Lord has instructed, and Lot with him. That's his nephew that kind of comes along. You've probably heard some of these stories before. Lot comes along with them. Abram was 75 years old when he left Haran. He took his wife Sarai, his nephew Lot, and all his wealth, his livestock, and all the people he had taken into his household at Haran, and headed for the land of Canaan. Now, God made some pretty cool promises to him. There was some pretty cool covenant deal made. He said, you follow me, I'm going to bless you. And I'm not just going to bless you. Every nation in the world, every distinct people group on this planet is going to be blessed through you if you just follow me. Something else to keep in mind is, even though he could sometimes hear directly from God, Abram did not have a Bible to read. So don't judge him too harshly. We can go through the Bible and look at all these places and hear the whole story and hear stories that happened centuries after him and centuries after that. He didn't. Or he could have looked ahead to Galatians in the New Testament and read this. Don't be misled. You cannot mock the justice of God. You will always harvest what you plant. Those who live only to satisfy their own sinful nature will harvest decay and death from that sinful nature. But those who live to please the Spirit will harvest everlasting life from the Spirit. By the way, people ask me often, what version are you using? Today, I happen to be using the New Living Translation. It's not the only good one. It's one of several that I believe are pretty accurate and worth reading, especially if you read other ones a lot. It kind of gives you a fresh take and makes you go back and reread and study a little bit more. But that's what I'm using today if anybody wants to know. Second big idea, though, this is where we're heading. I'd love for you to say this out loud with me. And if you're writing down words, the word is going to be guardrails. Let's say this together. God gives us guardrails, not fences. I think that's really important to remember because fences are designed to keep us in. They restrict us. Or they're designed to keep everybody else out, right? Fences are very restrictive. Fences are not fun. Guardrails are not really all about keeping you out of the woods or anyplace else. They're keeping you on track. And when we remember that, it makes all of his rules sound a whole lot better. It makes them make a lot more sense. His rules protect us. They guide us. They keep us focused on him. They keep us focused on our traveling companions. They keep us focused on the journey ahead. Well, Abram and his wife, in all their whole group, they start out pretty well. And they obey God. But like often happens when we just start following God, some bad stuff happens and they start having some questions, some doubts. We'll jump right in. Still the same chapter as that big promise, the covenant promise that gets quoted all the time. At that time, a severe famine struck the land of Canaan, forcing Abram to go down to Egypt, where he lived as a foreigner. As he was approaching the border of Egypt, Abram said to his wife Sarai, "Look, you are a very beautiful woman." Now, I wish the story stopped right there. Because that's a pretty cool thing. Guys, if you've got a woman you love, especially if she's your wife, that's a good thing to say. Tell her that truth. Let her know you're thankful that she is attractive to you and probably God and a bunch of other people as well as just you. But sadly, that's not where this story starts. Abram is not thinking about Sarai very much. He's all about himself. This is not one of the happy stories. This is one of the ones we don't tell all the time. As he was approaching the border of Egypt, Abram said to his wife Sarai, "Look, you are a very beautiful woman. When the Egyptians see you, they will say, 'This is his wife. Let's kill him, and then we can have her.' So please tell them that you are my sister, and then they will spare my life and treat me well because of their interest in you." Yeah, that's Abraham, y'all. And that's layers and layers of wrong. I can't even go into just how many broken layers of badness that is, how selfish that is. He doesn't care what's going to happen to her. He doesn't care what they're going to do to her, what she's going to endure, that she's basically going to be treated as a piece of property. He's saying, hey, tell this lie for me so that they will spare my life and treat me well. Well, here's what happened. Short as I can tell it. Pharaoh has this kind of team, this kind of scouts that are always looking for really attractive ladies. And by this point, she's like 70. So I'm guessing they must... That wasn't me. That wasn't me. Hear me out. I think they must have aged a little slower. I mean, they lived a lot longer. And also, there's a lot of people in their 70s that are very attractive still, men and women. Okay? I'm just telling you the story straight out of the Bible. I'm just dealing with it. All right. So, Pharaoh had these scouts that are always looking for the best looking people, and they pick out Sarai, and they bring her into his harem. But nothing really technically happens. She's just kind of there, waiting her turn kind of a situation, being treated as property. And they give Abram all these gifts because it's kind of like a bride price. It's like this, that's how it was back then. Remember what I said about our moral boundaries? That was moral, that was legal, that was perfectly acceptable in their culture, as horrific as that is to us right now. But it wasn't okay with God. And I guarantee you it wasn't okay with Sarai. Okay? But Pharaoh, he accepts the deal and all that stuff. And then God sends all these plagues on this guy. This is a different one than experienced Joseph later, but it's the same basic idea. And he goes, what's going on? What's wrong? Why is some God angry at us? And they track it down. And he says, oh my goodness, we've been fooled by this Abraham guy. And so he gives Sarai back. And you can tell by this one verse, he does not trust this guy a lot at all. He's no longer welcome in Egypt. It says Pharaoh ordered some of his men to escort them. Make sure they get out of town. I don't even trust him to leave if I tell him to leave. Pharaoh ordered some of his men to escort them, and he sent Abram out of the country along with his wife and all of his possessions. Now somehow, miraculously, because God steps into our mess and sometimes works through it and sometimes works around it, they left not only alive, but still married. That's a miracle. Okay? That is a miracle. Not only that, they ended up with more stuff and more servants than they started out with. And you'd think that they'd learned their lesson. I mean, Joseph, when he went to Egypt, didn't tell lies. Joseph stayed faithful to God. It turned out for him way better than it turned out for even Abraham. Moses told the truth. Things went way better for him than it did for Abraham. Same place, dealing with a Pharaoh. You'd think they'd learn. But a couple chapters later, we get to chapter 20. And now they're not going to Egypt because they're no longer welcome there anymore. But a similar situation happens. Let's jump into Genesis 20. Abram moved south to the Negev and lived for a while between Kadesh and Shur. And then he moved on to Gerar. And while living there as a foreigner, Abram introduced his wife Sarah by saying, she is my sister. Seriously? No, he did not learn a lesson. And a lot's happened by this. Notice his name by this point is now Abraham. Her name is now Sarah. God's made even more promises. He's clarified what he wants from them and what he's wanting to give to them and give the world through him. In fact, in this particular story, this particular chapter of the scriptures, the righteous person is the king of this country. His name is Abimelech. So King Abimelech of Gerar sent for Sarah and had her brought to him at his palace. Again, this was just how things were done. I'm not saying it's okay. It's not okay. It's never okay with God. I guarantee it's not okay with Sarai, now Sarah. But it was okay with them, so they did it. They could have, if they had a Bible, looked ahead to Proverbs and read, the Lord detests lying lips, but he delights in those who tell the truth. They didn't have a Bible to carry around. We do. Now, just for fun, I think we got time to do this morning. I want to make sure that we remember this guy's name, this king, whoever he is, Abimelech. We're not sure why he had a closer relationship with God at this moment in time than Abraham did. But he did. So I want you to remember his name. His name is Abimelech. And an easy way to remember that is to the tune of The Lion Sleeps Tonight. Can you try this with me? Abimelech, 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 Abimelech. Keep it going. Abimelech, 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 Abimelech. Keep it going. Abraham was a real good guy, a friend of God, but he lied. Abimelech said that Sarah was just his sister and not really his wife. He lied to Abimelech, 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 Abimelech. You got this? Like Abimelech. Keep it going. You got this. We don't like us. God hates lying lips. That's enough. We're good. I think Here's the point, though. You're going to remember that. You're going to remember the name, Abimelech. And in the middle of the night, God actually comes to this guy, Abimelech, and in a dream and speaks to him. Abraham's not even praying at this moment. He's still Abraham, but he's still on that journey. And he is, at this point, smacking every guardrail, busting through several, working his way back, four-wheeling it back, trying to get back on track. Abimelech got up early the next morning and quickly called all his servants together. And when he told them what had happened, his men were terrified. And then Abimelech called for Abraham. "What have you done for us?" he demanded. "What crime have I committed that deserves treatment like this, making me and my kingdom guilty of this great sin? No one should have ever done what you have done. What possessed you to do such a thing?" This guy actually is aware of God's moral boundaries that don't change no matter what's legal or what's not legal, or what's culturally accepted or not culturally accepted. He's more aware of that than Abraham. Well, Abraham doesn't really apologize. He makes some excuses, but he does pray, and God takes away the plagues that were plaguing Abimelech and his family. Somehow, again, miraculously, they leave with even more stuff and more servants, and they're still married. I don't know how that happened other than just the grace of God. And Sarah must have been something else. That's all I can tell you. But then Sarah messes up. You guys know this story probably better. Well, we'll skip ahead, but we're getting there. This story just stays complicated, y'all, for a long time. She does something else that's totally acceptable in their culture, totally horrific to us. When she's having trouble having children, she gives her servant or slave to Abraham. Her name is Hagar. She gives Hagar to Abraham to have children, and then whatever children they have, she'll claim as her own. That was okay for them. It's not okay with God. It didn't turn out well. Eventually, she does have the child of the promise, Isaac, and eventually he grows up. When he's about 30, finally, by this point, Abraham's finally starting to get it. So this is one of those stories we tell all the time, where God finally tells Abraham, "Hey, I want you to sacrifice your son Isaac." And he goes, "Okay." Because by this point, he finally trusted God so much that we're literally told, even in the New Testament, that he imagined God's going to keep his promises. If he has to, he'll bring him back to life. I'm going to see another miracle. He had smacked enough guardrails, busted through enough of them, that finally, when he finally got to this point, him and Isaac both. Isaac is like 30 years old. He's also on board, or this wouldn't happen. Okay? Abraham's like 100 and some. Isaac's like 30 some. I think he could have fought him off. This is a moment of faith for both of them. So I've got so much hope for Isaac and Rebekah as they take the leadership of the clan. They're going to do things different, right? Let's keep reading. Genesis 26. A severe famine now struck the land, as had happened before in Abraham's time. And so Isaac moved to Gerar, where Abimelech, king of the Philistines, lived. The Lord appeared to Isaac and said, "Do not go down to Egypt, but do as I tell you. Live here as a foreigner in this land, and I will be with you." And then he spends quite a few verses here just reinstating the covenant again, making it fresh with Isaac. I'm going to bless you. I'm going to give you all these descendants. I'm going to bless the entire planet through you. So Isaac stayed in Gerar, and when the men who lived there asked Isaac about his wife, Rebekah, he said, "Oh, she's my wife." Is anybody reading along? Nobody even reacted to that, okay? You got to pay attention. This is God's word. So Isaac stayed in Gerar. When the men lived there asked Isaac about his wife, Rebekah, he said, "She is my sister." Because he was afraid to say, "She's my wife." He thought, they will kill me to get her because she's so beautiful. Where do you think he learned that? And that's the scariest thing about all this, guys, is one of the main reasons that we need to stay on track is because there's always somebody behind you. There's always somebody following your taillights. And I don't know why, but we are way more likely to follow somebody else's mistake than we ever are to follow the good stuff. I don't know why that is, but it's true. How many parents or grandparents can look and there's things that you tried so hard to teach your children that they never did learn, and there's other things that you wish they'd never even noticed about you, buddy, they do that all day long. Anybody? That's almost universal. This is how it works. This is human nature. We tend to do this, and this happened here. But also we see the faith getting passed on. We see good habits getting passed on. We see a legacy that's intentional and good get passed on sometimes as well. Now, Isaac also didn't have a script Bible to carry around. If he did, he could have looked ahead to Romans and read this. For the sinful nature is always hostile to God. It never did obey God's laws, and it never will. That's why those who are still under the control of their sinful nature can never please God. Therefore, dear brothers and sisters, Paul writes, you have no obligation to do what your sinful nature urges you to do. For if you live by its dictates, you will die. But if through the power of the Spirit you put to death the deeds of your sinful nature, you will live. For all who are led by the Spirit of God are children of God. We have real freedom. We have the ability to make a real choice. We're not obligated to sin. We're not trapped in that. We're not inside of a fence where we can only sin. We're out on an open road that has some guardrails, and God's letting us drive. So the wise choice would be this: always tell the truth. I'd love for you to say that out loud. If you're writing stuff down, write down the truth. Let's say this together. Always tell the truth. And again, God's dream for us is not just that we don't do bad things. Of course, he wants us to not do bad things. But that's not his whole dream. As long as they don't do those bad things, that's not really the whole picture. He's saying, don't do that because I need you to do this. This is what life's about. This is what mattered. This is what gives you a fulfilled life. This is what's going to matter for all eternity. I need you to do this. Therefore, guardrails on either side of that. Don't do that. Don't do that. Telling the truth is not just not telling lies. That's a good place to start. Not telling lies is absolutely where it starts. But telling the truth means actually telling the truth. And the most effective way to tell the truth, to communicate the truth to someone else, is to actually live it before them. Show them what it looks like to follow God. Show them what it looks like to believe that what God says is the best way, even if you don't understand it, even if it's not the way you would have designed it. But you follow it anyway. You build your boundaries within his boundaries. You show people what that looks like. That's the best way to tell the truth. There's a story that gets passed around about Abraham Lincoln, a famous quote of his that you know me, I'm always running down rabbit holes. I want to know if it's really real. Turns out it's almost real. The story, the most popular version of the story is that he used an illustration of a dog. In the actual original quote, it was a calf. But the essence was the same. He asked somebody, I'll use calf because I looked it up, spent a long time finding what it really was, so I'm going to say calf, okay? If you've seen it on Pinterest and it says dog, Happy New Year, it's all good, okay? But it's a calf. Anyway, he said to somebody, he said, if you called a calf's tail a leg, how many legs would a calf have? Okay, somebody's already got this right. Somebody who was really into math goes, well, 5. And he says, no, calling it a leg doesn't make it a leg. It's still a tail. The calf's still going to have 4 legs and 1 tail. What you call it doesn't actually change anything. And I really do believe that. I believe that's the truth that we see threading throughout the scripture. Not the only one, but one of them. That what God says is the truth. That Jesus Christ is the way, the truth, the life. That no one comes unto the Father except through him. That what's actually really true in one way or another, no matter who says it, it's true because it harmonizes with what God says and what actually is true. Not because they just have a better way of coming up with cool, new, original ideas than we do. It's true or it's not true. And when we start understanding that, we're much more likely to stay on the path and not smack the guardrails so hard. Maybe even slow down even more than we need to sometimes. And thank God we do have our Bibles and we can look ahead and we can see verses like this in Colossians. Let your roots grow down into him. Let your lives be built on him. And then your faith will grow strong in the truth that you were taught, and you will overflow with thankfulness. This is why we study the Bible on our own. It's why we do devotional thoughts. It's why we have small groups where we study God's word together. It's why we do what we're doing here this morning. It's not about a class. It's not about religiously just appeasing God by showing up certain times. We're doing this to learn. We're digging our roots down so that we know the truth, that we are locked in, we are fed by the truth. And we don't just not lie, we tell the truth with our words and with our actions. I like the way this particular translation makes it so clear. I actually really like the original phrase, which is straight out of the Greek, even better. But how many have ever heard where 1 John talks about walking in the light? Okay? Walking in the light sounds better, it's more poetic, it's pretty, but it also, this translation makes it just a little bit clearer. It's why I'm using it today. He says, if we claim we have no sin, we're only fooling ourselves and not living in the truth. To walk in the light is to live in a way, that you are actually living out the truth. That's what it looks like to walk in the light. He says, but if we confess our sins to him, he is faithful and just to forgive us our sins and to cleanse us from all wickedness. Brothers and sisters, that's the biggest blessing that we have. God doesn't just forgive us. That cleansing idea is not just washing us clean. It's purifying us. It's like if you have really nasty water and you really need water and you don't have any other source, but you get that nasty water and you boil it and you filter it and you mess around. Eventually you end up with actually clean water. It's not filthy water anymore. And that's what God does for us. He forgives us. He doesn't say, hey, forget you, you nasty mud puddle. He cleanses us. He makes us new. He doesn't just get us back on the road. He fixes the car, works out the cracks, repaints, does what he needs to do, and then fills up the tank and sends us on our way. Thank God we have that. Thank God Abraham did. Thank God Isaac did, or we never would have been here. All the failures that they had would have derailed the whole messianic plan if God didn't operate this way. But they were people just like us. And God still has that mercy for us. So this morning, we're going to sing one more song, and you're going to have a chance to make a decision if you'd like. You can make it right where you are. If you'd like to talk to somebody and make it public, one of our elders is going to be standing right there. Here's what I would love. Would you pray right now and ask God what he wants you to do with the true freedom that he gives you? What does he want you to do with it? He'll let you do anything and then see the consequences. But what does he want you to do? What choice does he want you to make today? And what guardrails do you see yourself slamming into all the time? Maybe you could just lay that before God. Ask him that question. God, which guardrails do I need to back off from? Stop scraping along and asking you to forgive me and actually just kind of slow down a little bit. Stay within the lines better. Do something so that it's easier. And most of all, how does God want you and me and you and me together to tell the truth? Not just be a bunch of people who are known that keep their word and don't lie, but people who say and live out the truth of God. That's the legacy we want to leave. That's what God wants. I know that's what you want. What do you need to do about that today? Please do that as we stand and sing.